Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a preview for a brand new game from Shadowborne Games and designer Jamie Jolly. It is called Oathsworn Into the Deepwood, and we've done a first look on this one already, David. However, we're back to give you some things that make this game different from other campaign games.
Yeah, if you want to take a look at sort of more of a general overview, we did talk about that in our first look today. Like Jeremy just said, we're going to try to dive into a couple little elements that make this thing different. And this game is a dungeon diving game, but it has a huge story element as well.
Yeah, there is so much content in this game that we couldn't even fit it on the overhead camera. You have to look at the main camera to see what is going on with this game. There are two main segments here. You have a story portion of the game, which is going to last about 30 to 60 minutes, and there's multiple ones which are going to be contained over multiple different maps. Each one of these maps is going to have their own story, which is tied in very much to the actual combat portion of the game as well.
Yeah, the encounter is a very distinctly different portion of the game than the story. One thing we should say, again, this is a prototype in front of us, but you can already see, and you've seen in our first look, the artwork and all of the artistry that went into this game is insane. From beginning to end, they have an app that has incredible narration. Everything absolutely looks gorgeous.
All right, so let's talk about these two parts in a little more detail. The very first thing you're going to do is pick one of the main characters in the game. The game's going to deliver with 6 characters, and these are called the Oathsworn. These are the people that are going to go into the Deepwood, which is an overgrown forest that is creeping upon the inhabitants or the free companies. These story elements are going to take place in different areas. Each of these has their own narrative that is going to be driven by one of two things. You can either read it from one of the campaign books, or you can do the narration through the app itself. This is a branching path that the players are going to choose how they approach this story. The story is going to develop in a number of different ways. You're going to meet people that are going to give you new equipment. You could upgrade your things, but it's going to lead directly into this encounter itself.
Yeah, that's one of the really unique things about this is there's a lot of games that do these sorts of things, but this one really sets up the encounter in a significant way because the things you're doing on this map in the story mode have significant potentially impact on the encounter. It could start you off in a very different way. Of course, you're going to be able to visit places that might equip you better for that encounter, but they're going to be tied together very, very closely.
Not to mention that the whole thing has this looming time element built in. Each of these locations is going to use up an X number of your time in this particular location, which is done with this time board over here. When you visit these locations, you're going to be picking up these tokens and placing on this board, using up your time. And this time is important because once you reach the end of it, you're automatically thrown into the encounter. So you're trying to find some kind of narration in the game that leads you down a path that you want to go down. Each of these different things is going to affect how you approach this encounter itself.
Yeah, there's going to be decisions that you have to make, puzzles that you have to solve, and you have that tension that's built into this story that you really don't find in a lot of other games like this because you're trying to do it in a certain amount of time. And as you hit certain points on that track, you're also going to trigger city events that might have even larger impact on the upcoming encounter.
One of the important things to consider as well is the character that you're using. As we mentioned, when you play this game, you're going to choose one of the characters that can follow you along through all of the adventures in the game. You're going to be upgrading your character by getting new ability cards. These ability cards are the meat and potatoes of the game. They're going to allow you to do combat in very unique ways and different from other players in the game. And by doing this story element, you're going to gain experience that can be used to upgrade these cards, that can upgrade your equipment. And then you have this card here that is going to allow you to have permanent upgrades to the rest of the campaign, meaning that each time you go into it, you're going to become stronger and stronger.
Yeah, so once you're done with the story or the story's done with you, when you've gone through that time track or when you've reached a point where you can move on to the encounter, that's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to move on to the significant meat and potatoes of this game. This is where the sort of combat happens for sure.
Now, before we get into that, I do want to preface and say that if you're not into story-based games, each of these different campaigns or stories is going to have a summary within that campaign book that is 500 words or less. And you can simply read through that so everyone at the table is aware of what happened in that particular map location. In fact, if you just want to do combat in the game, they have a challenge mode where you can just go against these bosses one after another if you so choose. However, being that we love story and narrative, highly
Yes.
suggest going through this because it does set up this encounter itself. Speaking of the encounter, it's going to take about an hour and a half to 2 hours to get through each of these. And the thing that we love about this is that it acts very much like a boss battle in some of our favorite types of video games, because they have their own pathing, they have their own sets of cards, their own stages. They're going to become stronger and stronger, and you have to figure out these basically these movement patterns that they have and try to defeat them, because each of their body parts is going to have different unique hit points and different abilities on them.
Yeah, not to mention an unbelievably detailed miniature with these things. Like Jeremy just said, this really feels like an epic boss battle. There's a lot of games in this genre that do smaller, just sort of go into a generic dungeon, and that's fine as well. These encounters are going to feel very, very epic. The story that you just completed or read is going to really build up what you're facing here, and it's going to tie very much into the different stages of the main creature in this encounter.
So not only are the bosses very unique, but let's talk about the actual combat itself, because this is a big draw of the game. Each of the players is going to come to the table with one of these boards. It's going to show you all of your pertinent stats that you're going to use. However, the board itself serves a very important purpose in the game. That's because on each of the edges you have a number. You have a 0 stage on the bottom, a 1, a 2, and a 3. And each of your ability cards in the game is going to have basically a casting cost or an animus cost to use them, but also a stage on which side of that battle board is going to be placed.
Yeah, for example, I'll give you 2 examples in fact. I have loose arrow. This is sort of the most basic way that I can perform combat. I'm shooting 1 arrow. When I use this, it's going to cost me 3 animus, which is up in this corner, but it's going to go into the 0 position, so it means I'm going to get that card back a lot sooner. There's a really cooldown aspect to how this battle flow works. Whereas with the multi-shot, which is a much more significant action, it's going to cost 4 animus. It's going to go into my 3 slot, so it's going to take a while for that to come down. One really cool thing here is those are going to naturally come down round to round, but there's something you can do while you're playing by playing other cards in those same slots to push cards further down around the board so that you can get some of those cards back a little sooner than you might have.
And that is called battle flow. Anytime you place one of those cards in the same location with multiple different cards that could be there, all of those cards are going to push down to the next location. Meaning, just as you said, you're going to get those cards back, and that's one of the important things about the game, is the hand management aspect of those ability cards. Using your animus and using your tactics and abilities in the right times is going to be more important as you try to defeat this boss.
Yeah, and you've heard us talk about animus. Animus is this material you're going to be using on your turn to power everything you do during the encounter phase. You're going to spend animus to move, and you're going to spend animus to play those cards that we just talked about. On a player's turn, they're going to spend as much of that as they want to do what they want. And then after their turn, their character is going to be done until the next round. The other cool thing here is they suggest that you play around the table, but you can sort of jump in. So if you really want to, you can kind of discuss cooperatively who it makes the most sense to go first and determine that order.
One of the other really cool things about the game is the way that combat is resolved. It can be done in one of 2 very distinct ways, either with dice or with cards. Now, you can actually use a combination of both of these things, and it's important for people like me who don't like a lot of luck or a lot of randomness in my combat. And that's important because in the game, dice are your results. And when you roll your dice, you're going to be rolling the dice according to the weapons that you have in front of you. Stronger weapons are going to allow you to roll stronger dice. However, at any given time in combat, you can always roll as many white dice as you wish. Now, here's the rub in the game. When you roll your dice, you're going to try to get successes according to whatever it is you're trying to do. However, you fail if at any time you roll 2 blanks. And that's important because in this game, which I absolutely love, when you fail in this game, you still get some kind of consolation prize, and that comes in the form of combat tokens. You become stronger and stronger as you fail, and those combat tokens come in a wide variety of effects.
Yeah, the combat tokens are really where this combat appeals to more of the Euro gamers out there because you're able to mitigate the dice on future rolls. Some of these combat tokens are going to allow you to upgrade some of the dice or cards that you use to the next level up. Like Jeremy said, you can use any number of white. Even if you are weaponless, you're going to be able to roll white dice. I could use this token, for example, to upgrade 2 of those to yellow, or one of them all the way to red. And obviously the yellow, the red, and the black are going to have more successes and stronger attacks.
Now, I want to come back to the cards and the dice because this is really important to talk about this aspect of the game, especially for someone like me who likes more of a Euro aspect when it comes to luck in games. The dice are always what dice are going to be. You're going to roll them and they're going to be any kind of value that shows up. However, the cards work a little bit differently.
Yeah, the cards are finite. Like Jeremy just said, when you roll dice, they can be anything every time you roll them. But with the cards, when you're flipping cards throughout the game, they stay flipped up. So if I flipped over a bunch of zeros, we now know collectively that the deck has far fewer zeros in it. So the next time someone checks something, they might want to consider that deck as opposed to rolling the dice because we know there's a lot more successes in it.
And one of the cool things is that you can do both on a turn. So if you're doing a combat check or a check within the story, you can do a mixture of either of those. It's up to you on how you want to approach that. And there's a number of different combat tokens as well that will allow you to re-roll those or redraw those cards according to the tokens that you expend. So combat is never just pure luck in this game.
No, it isn't. In fact, if you failed a couple times, you're going to have some combat tokens to spend. And those range, like we said, you can empower dice, you can re-roll dice. There's ones that allow you to shift the cards around the board again, and even ones that give you animus and extra defense.
Now, coming back to the encounter itself, you're going to be taking turns in this game. Each of the players is going to take a turn before the actual encounter itself is going to take its own turn. And these monsters are going to come in 3 different stages. Each of the stages is represented by 5 cards. Each of these body parts on them is going to have a number of hit points. So each time you're flipping over one of these cards is going to empower something on that creature to do something completely different. And this is the big lure for me, is that all of these monsters, all of these creatures, all these encounters are going to be very different from one to the next.
Yeah, we've said it before and we'll say it again. We love this sort of thing because it really brings in our experience playing video games over the years. When you tell me that there's a boss or a figure in this game where I can target or potentially hit its arm or its leg, and it has different phases, so once it reaches a certain state, it's going to evolve and do things differently. It brings back a lot of those sorts of memories.
Now, we don't know for sure how large the campaign is, but looking at the back of this card, this says there's 15 chapters, so we can probably expect around 15 different encounters in this. Probably more characters with stretch goals. A lot of stuff going on in this game, but it's very cool. It's got a lot of different unique elements that make it far different from other types of campaign games that we've played.
Yeah, it really does have some unique things. I'm not a player to get into these types of games typically, but this thing has enough unique things going on that are reminiscent of my video game days that really make me want to play it. The cooldowns, and as a Eurogamer, also being able to mitigate a lot of the dice rolling with these tokens, but also with these cards, is a really unique option to give all the gamers at the table sort of a different way of playing.
People should really be excited about this one. Make sure you guys go to the Kickstarter page to see all the final components as well as any extra stretch goals that may be involved with it. If you have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below and we will answer those for you. Subscribe to us on Twitter, Facebook, and everything else that we do. And we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.